Good morning. My name is Dr. Ellen Storm and it is about 6 o'clock in the morning on Friday, the 20th of February, 2026. I have not made a video about Lucy Letby for quite a while. Got my morning cup of tea with me, just to help me to gather my thoughts on this subject, perhaps. Because I watched the recent Netflix documentary. I watched the recent Netflix documentary about Lucy, in which it shows clips of her being interviewed by the police about the subject of the handover sheets that were found in her bedroom when her bedroom was searched. And I'd like to say something about that subject, because I am a doctor in the NHS. I work as a senior clinical fellow in paediatrics and neonates. And I first started work in the NHS in the year 2000, so 26 years ago. And at that point in time, we didn't have handover sheets. They didn't exist. What we did was get bits of printer paper, A4 blank bits of printer paper. When we had our handover, we would just write freehand the details of all of the patients from, the previous person, what they were telling us about our patients and what we needed to know. We would scribble it down on a bit of random paper that we'd grabbed from somewhere and stuff it in our pocket and carry it around the hospital. And at the end of the day, there wasn't anywhere to put it. There wasn't confidential waste bins like there are now. I don't honestly remember what we used to do with them. I mean, some of them probably went in the waste paper bins, or some of them went in hospital bins. And I think a large proportion of them got taken home and either disposed of. Some people, maybe they disposed of them appropriately at that stage in history. And I suspect that a very large number of people acquired piles of them in their homes. I'd be very, very surprised if there was almost anybody of my generation who has not at some point in time taken handover sheets or previously bits of paper with patient details on them home. And not only that, but I used to work in certainly one place I remember where the consultants quite regularly took whole piles of patient notes home in their boots of their cars. That was a community job, so it involved doing clinics in sort of far-flung places, and they didn't have like now, but even that's only been relatively recently, certainly in the area that I work, that we now have couriers taking the patient notes to the clinics. So when you have a clinic list, the notes will be there. That never used to happen. So people were really, that was normal. They didn't question that. So for myself, although I think, there's been a lot of work has been done in the last few years trying to increase awareness around the information governance risks presented by people taking handover sheets off-site. And even on-site, my hospital library has signs up saying, it is, a serious disciplinary offence for you to leave your handover sheets lying around the library, for example. Not that they would know whose handover sheet it was if they found one anyway, but, you know, the fact is the signs are there because people keep leaving their handover sheets lying around the library. And not only that, they leave their handover sheets lying around in the canteen. They leave their handover sheets, they drop them in the car park. They leave them lying around on the wards because they lose them, because they accidentally get caught up in patient notes, all sorts of things. And all of these things have happened and continue to happen, despite our best efforts really to try to educate people about why they shouldn't. And now I think most people are relatively more disciplined about putting their handover sheets into the confidential waste bins at the ends of their shifts. But even then, there has to be a confidential waste bin there, depending where you are, where your shift takes you. I suppose there are still conceivable times when that's not going to be the case. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it's not the case that now it's just like really everybody is putting their handover sheets into the confidential waste bin at the end of their shift. Every single doctor or nurse across the whole of the NHS is obediently doing that. And there's a process, a learning process, which is for all of us and also for the organisations that we work for. And depending where you go in the country, and I'm someone who's worked all over England and Wales, so I've seen a lot of different practices and a whole range of different practices, and kind of standards, I suppose it's fair to say. We don't go overnight from the point at which everybody is scrawling all over bits of paper and taking those bits of paper home, and there's no confidential waste bins, and, you know, to the point where everybody is, you know, putting their handover sheets in the confidential waste bins and they're never being taken home and they're never being dropped in the car park. That's a really, really big, long process of education. And it's one that isn't finished. I don't think that anybody should be naive about that or, you know, should misunderstand. Now, in terms of Lucy and her over 200 handover sheets in the box in her bedroom, that was a stupid thing to do. It was stupid, but it doesn't make her a murderer. And I feel a bit sad that there aren't more healthcare professionals coming forwards and saying, well, you know what, we all used to do that. Or we all, you know, we probably all at some point had a pile somewhere in our back room, you know, that we had to deal with because, you know, now we know better. And it's unfortunate that Lucy didn't know better, but arguably, really the fault for that has to lie at the manager's feet, at the feet of the people who were educating her and, you know, the culture of the place where she was working. I also think that the other thing I would like to say about this is that I do still have a pile of handover sheets. I just keep them in a different place. So I now have a pile of handover sheets that I keep for my own personal portfolio and reflective purposes, if you like, in a locked locker, in a locked office in the hospital. So that is where I now keep the handover sheets that I need to keep for my learning and development purposes. But I wanted to read you, because if you follow me and you know me, I'm going to have to pull this out now, hang on a minute, my little box of tricks under here. I wanted to read you a poem from my book of poems, which I keep under my desk. So this is my book of poetry, collected poems and songs from between 1989 and 2024. And not quite the very last one. I think it's the third from the end. So I wrote this one in on the 2nd of April, 2024. I went for a walk in a place in North Wales where there is a river, and I walked out onto some stones that were in the kind of jutting out, if you like, into the middle of the river, and I was looking up towards, as the river was coming towards me, and it was sort of coming towards me. It was like, it was a kind of upland river, and it was rushing towards me, and then it sort of split, and kind of most of it went down that way a bit anyway. And it just struck me at that moment that felt so much like the work that we do in the NHS, that it's just coming at you constantly all the time. It never, ever, ever stops. And, you know, most of it, you know, it's like you are in sort of almost battle mode where, especially if you work in an acute specialty, something like intensive care or neonatal intensive care or accident and emergency, you know, it's just this kind of just coming endless stream. You're dealing with it, you're in battle mode, and then it goes past you. And for the most part, those cases are gone. And there was a point when Lucy was being interviewed about a case that she had been involved in, and she just said, I don't remember that case. Well, you know, I'd really like to see more people coming out in support of Lucy in terms of being able to say, do you know what, that is absolutely how it is, because it certainly is how it is for me. I know, for example, that sometime last year there was a 33-week baby that I think I put a line in, and we intubated that baby, and they got sent out somewhere else to a different hospital. Like, that's about all I could tell you about that case. And that was a quite big case for us. You know, where I'm working at the moment, we don't really deal a lot with really small premature babies or the very sick ones. They do tend to get transferred, because I'm currently working in something called a level 1 neonatal unit or special care baby unit. So it's really just babies who are learning how to feed and sleeping and growing and things like that. So, but I have worked in a number of different level 3 neonatal units as well in the past. So I have worked in the Royal London in Whitechapel. I've worked in St Peter's in Chertsey. I've worked in Canterbury, which was a level 2, and the Liverpool Women's, which was a level 3, and Arrow Park, which was a level 3. So, you know, I do have a reasonable amount of neonatal experience too. I'm not a neonatologist as such, but, you know, I know something about the subject. Okay, anyway, back to the poem. So the poem is called Torrent. The rock had a certain squareness about it. The river had hewn its way down into the valley, cutting steps as it went that I followed. Some millennia later, rucksack on back, children running ahead, picnic eaten, experience delivered. And as I stood at the water's edge, facing the rushing torrent, I thought that this is what my work is like. A never-ending rush of water coming at you, so you face it down, white foam, sunshine's evil glint on spray, that shows you it could drown you. Deal with it, and then it's gone, equally forever, or it passes you by, just out of reach, or it hits you square in the face so you stagger, but haven't time to catch your breath or regain your balance, because the river keeps on coming and coming, demanding your attention, cutting ever deeper into the earth. So on my pile of handover sheets, I have the word CESR in a little box on the cases that I have seen that were interesting to me, that I knew that I needed to go away and read about excuse me, and learn more about. And CESR stands for Certificate for Entry onto the Specialist Register. It's not called CSER anymore. It's now called the Portfolio Pathway, but I am still busy putting together a portfolio for entry onto the Specialist Register. And in the middle of that torrent, I have to try to remember the cases that I want to go back to and look at and think about and reflect on, and maybe do what we call case-based discussions, or just write a reflective note about that case. And maybe I want to go away and read more about the particular topic that particular case has highlighted for me. And really, in the middle of all of the busyness, the only way that I can do that is to keep the handover sheet and make a mark on it and put it in a pile when I am at the end of a shift and I am absolutely, totally exhausted. And I just do that, and I put it in the pile in the locker, and then at some point later I will order those notes from the medical records, and I will sit down and I will take a bit of time to read through it and to write whatever it is that I want to write about them. The reality is that pile, I mean, it's not 200, but there's still a pile, because sometimes when you're having a busy run, you don't get around to actually sitting down and having some time to do that kind of reflection for months, sometimes months and months and months. I might just sit down every few months and sort of have a look at the cases that have come up. So when I say that I feel disappointed about my profession not supporting Lucy, I'm not really saying that anybody needs to say whether Lucy is innocent or guilty, but I do think, the narratives that are coming out around these handover sheets now are creating a situation in which nobody can ever say, well, actually, hang on a minute, we all used to do that. And it's a shame that, Lucy was still doing it, but it doesn't make her a murderer. What we need to be engaging with is that each individual component of this story, if you like, when that's not quite adding up for us, really, So it's not that we need to come to a conclusion about innocence or guilt. We don't need to stand there and say, I believe that Lucy is innocent. What we do need to say is, if we are following this story and we are hearing things that are not right, we need to say that they're not right. And I think it's absolutely conceivable that keeping your handover sheets in a box in your bedroom is something that a conscientious person might do, who wants to, with marks on them, like a little asterisk or a little box containing the letters Caesar. And, we can look at it now and say, well, that's a stupid thing to do. And it's a really bad thing to do from an information governance perspective. But we have to train people to understand about information governance and why that's important. And I just think, if everybody kind of was willing to put their hands up in the air and say, yeah, at some point in my career, I did that too, then, I think if you were, even now, actually, I suspect that if you were able to do the sort of study where you randomly searched the homes of, I don't know, a random sample of nurses or even doctors for handover sheets, you would find some in a good proportion of those homes. It's just a hypothesis. That's not a study anyone can ever do. Most people think their homes are sort of their sacred space, don't they? We don't believe anyone's ever going to come in and do what they did to Lucy. it's quite reasonable that she would never in a million years have imagined that that would have happened. And she probably didn't think that those handover sheets were in any way unsafe, in the sense that they were not, were at risk of getting into the public domain. Now, we know now that that's not true, but, for the probably large part of my career, I would say that most doctors I knew and have worked with would not have thought very much of it. And they might have, maybe if they'd known about it, might have just gone, well, you better get rid of those. But they wouldn't have said it was criminal. And, I think we need to keep some perspective around that subject, really. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's all I have to say. If you're watching this, please put your handover sheets in the bins if you're a nurse or a doctor watching this in the future. And if you have got any handover sheets flying around your house, please get rid of them. Because now we know, don't we? Yeah. Have a great day. Bye.